Welcome to Greenwood, 1921, a black city that lit the night with prosperity and then was set on fire. June 1st, 1921, Greenwood, Tulsa. The street is aglow of cinders and glass. Footsteps crunch where shop windows used to reflect Saturday hats and brass button coats. And a black man in a soot-gray vest steadies a stack of charred affidavits against the wind. They called this place the Negro Wall Street of America restaurants, with white tablecloths, a hotel big enough to host a parade of Sunday hats, doctors and lawyers, and singers working the midnight shift under marquee lights. Then, someone struck a match. Not once, not by accident. Whole blocks went up like kindling, soaked in talk radio rage long before there was radio. Planes hummed where only sparrows should belong. And Greenwood learned what it meant when rumor gets a gasoline can and the law looks away. Listen, the fire has a language. It says ledger books curl into fists. Photographs bubble and blur into a single gray face. A barbershop pole spins without a ceiling above it. Behind the smoke, a black lawyer breathes like a metronome and out and writes a sentence no one wants to read. We were burned, and we are still here. Midnight had an address in Greenwood. You could buy a newspaper at Archer, and Greenwood argue about the price of cotton, then walk to the Stratford and feel the stair rails polished by 1,000 Saturdays. You could be 21 and perfect your signature on a bank slip. You could be 19 and learn the science of hair, the arithmetic of rent, the geometry of love. All of it subject to erasure if the right lie found the right crowd at the right hour. So hear the sound that begins. All American ghost stories, boots on a porch. A name shouted wrong on purpose, the promise that law and order will arrive any minute, except it already has with kerosene. Hear a hymnal drift through the alley, not from a church, but from the people themselves, a chord held in the throat when the piano is gone. In the back glow of an orange night, a figure gathers pages from the street deeds, receipts, testimonies, the proof that there was a city here and that cities can be murdered. Never forget, we say so easily. But forgetting is an industry. It hires bulldozers and printers and whoever paints over maps. It files the word riot where massacre belongs. It lifts the lens just high enough to miss the faces that would make the caption true. Tonight we lower the lens until it touches the ash and we speak names that burn cleaner than gasoline. Before we begin, leave a comment with where you're watching from and the exact time on your clock right now. Someone 100 years from you may read it, may find their own city in your words, may realize why the smoke never really cleared. Greenwood is still walking, through courtrooms and kitchens, through ledgers and lullabies, through every American place that learned how quickly prosperity can ignite when hatred finds kindling. We start here in the heat, in the hush between sirens, with a man holding pages that almost became silence, and a neighborhood that refused to. June 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The prairie heat sits low over the streets like a held breath. And north of the railroad tracks, the neighborhood called Greenwood hums with a rhythm all its own. Morning opens with shoe shine brushes ticking along boot leather, with doors chiming on Archer Street, with skillet oil whispering in boarding houses where men count tips and women fold Sunday dresses over chairbacks. They called it Black Wall Street sometimes with wonder, sometimes with a sneer. But here the nickname felt less like a boast and more like a map. Banks Barber's the Dreamland Theater's bright marquee, a druggist who knew everyone's cough by sound, a lawyer's shingle that caught the afternoon sun. Listen closely. There's a train horn pushing past the heat haze, a piano practicing scales behind a second-story window, the stamp and click of a typewriter where affidavits will one day be born from ash. O.W. Gurley's store glows at the corner like a lantern at dusk. The Stratford Hotel, a block-long promise in brick, watches the avenue with the dignity of many Saturdays. Children run with penny candy. Veterans in pressed coats carry themselves like men who've seen a front line and came home determined to build a street where their children would only ever march for music. The city is two maps laid on top of each other. White Tulsa to the south with courthouse columns and editors' desks. Black Tulsa to the north with churches that double as banks of trust and kitchens that double as parliaments. Between them, the track's iron syllables tapping out a stubborn grammar of separation. And yet, money crosses, rumors cross, glances cross, especially the kind that need no words. In the air lies the turn-of-the-century blend of kerosene and optimism. People stacking tomorrow upon today, rafters upon joists, hope upon hope. It had not been easy to build, never easy, but Greenwood learned the math of survival. One deed at a time, one barber chair paid off by Saturday closings, one classroom added behind a church when the official school refused more desks. The street was a ledger that balanced itself with sweat. And if hardship came, a bad harvest, a bad loan, a bad law, the neighborhood passed. The hat the choir sang a little longer. The preacher paused on the word deliverance, and the room answered yes. But June darkens in slow degrees the way a room dims before the storm shows itself. And the wind carries something brittle on May 31st, the kind of rumor that clicks like flint against steel. An elevator. A girl. A scratch, a startle, a scream. Or perhaps no scream at all. Dick Rowland, a black shoeshine boy. Sarah Page, a white elevator operator, a story that multiplied each time it crossed a mouth. By afternoon, it had already become the sort of story that doesn't ask to be true, only to be told louder. Outside the newspaper office, presses do. What presses do when heat finds ink, they turn. A headline sharpens into a point. Somewhere a phrase chooses the word attack rather than accident. Assault rather than allegation. Paper, that most fragile of weapons, enters the city like a spark entering dry grass. The courthouse, that slow white building, becomes a stage. Men gather with faces that say they've come to witness something, or to make sure something happens, or both. A boy with a pistol on his hip, a man with a rope in his trunk, a badge that will later look like a permission slip, a deputy made on the spot, with no lesson but one. Sheriff McCulloch is a name on the air. He'll say he tried to hold the line. He'll say he told the crowd to go home. But the crowd that grows on courthouse steps has its own weather system. It is the kind of crowd that calls itself order, while it makes a crackle like kindling. If a rumor is oxygen, a mob is lungs. Evening slides down the courthouse facade. Somewhere a light flicks on in the jail corridor. Somewhere a man checks the last bullet in a cylinder and likes the sound it makes. Back in Greenwood, someone knocks over a salt shaker in a cafe, a small clatter that startles more than it should. People glance toward the south as if they can hear the courthouse breathing. There are men here who wore uniforms recently, who learned how to keep their heads low when artillery speaks, and who know the weight of the promise, equal citizenship, because they held it in their mouths overseas like a last cigarette. They ask a simple question. Are we going to let a boy be taken? The answer comes as a motion rather than a sentence. A handful of veterans check their rifles, check their hearts, and walk out into the night, because some rules are older than towns. Air cracks not yet with gunfire, but with that metallic taste that says, a city is choosing. South of the tracks, the editor folds his jacket, looks at his front page, and decides he has said enough. North of the tracks, a pastor turns the church key in the lock and keeps it in his pocket. A woman gathers her children's birth certificates in a tin and tucks it under her blouse because paper burns. But maybe not all paper if you hold it close enough to bone. Greenwood's evening is still then not still. The way a choir holds a note, then inhales. A black Ford idles outside the hotel, men speaking low through the window. The Dreamland Theater's last show lets out laughter on the sidewalk like glass beads spilling. Then a hesitation, then a hush. Above the prairie sky thinks about stars, but the city's light smears them, And a new kind of brightness begins to pool where you don't want it around the courthouse, in hard white circles where men argue with their jaws. The steps that follow are written too often in American cursive, the kind that slants toward tragedy. Deputies deputized by a gesture, some with shotguns, some with grudges. A rumor upgraded to certainty simply by repetition. A boy in a cell who hears the building exhale and wonders which sound means morning. A series of warnings that sound like invitations. And from Greenwood, one car, then another men arrive, not as invaders, but as witnesses sworn to the oldest law: we do not abandon our own. They come in uniforms without flags, coats brushed, boots shined, chins set, and they ask to see the sheriff. They offer help to keep the peace. The answer they receive is complicated by the crowd, which has never liked complicated things. A word becomes an argument, becomes a shove, becomes a hand on a gun, and the city realizes how thin a fuse actually is. Step back with the camera up and out and see the shape of the place. The refinery's skeleton against the west, the river like a dark belt to the east, the railroad slicing the map. Greenwood nestled on the slope like a congregation. Frame the businesses, the Williams confectionery with jars of colored sugar, a print shop that smells of ink and certainty. Doctors' offices with frosted glass stamped with gold letters. Imagine their ledgers pages thick with names and goods and payments. Imagine how those pages will look when heat teaches them to curl. The weather report for that night could be read in the faces of men rising pressure. Overnight winds from the south, a chance of embers. And yet in kitchens and bedrooms, Greenwood keeps doing the brave, ordinary thing, setting coffee on the stove, kneeling by a bed to pray in a voice that barely moves the air, tucking a pillow under a baby's small heat. Ordinary life. The greatest scandal to those who believe some lives don't belong in the catalog of ordinary. What did the streets smell like? Coal smoke and hair tonic, fried catfish and cheap cologne, the faint bite of hot ink and the sweeter breath of laundry starched to a shine. What did it sound like, a hymn that refuses to end on the note you expect? The arithmetic click of an adding machine. A mother saying a child's name twice once, to call once, to keep. And under it all, a low grinding from the south, as if the city's gears were slipping. When you walk Greenwood before midnight, you can read its plans on the storefront glass expansion. Second locations, a tailor taking orders from customers who want to dress like tomorrow. You can read its fears in the glances that move past the tracks and then back again. This is not innocence, it is experience braided into hope. It is the knowledge that some men carry fires in their pockets and call it civic duty. It is the knowledge that if trouble comes, you carry yourself as a citizen. Stand, speak, protect, document. So the stage is set not by fate, but by choices accumulating like dry leaves. A newspaper that decides its words will be a match. A courthouse that decides to be a theater. A police force that decides the line between keep the peace and pick a side is something you can draw with a fingertip in dust. A neighborhood that decides to walk toward danger with backs straight and voices careful. Because the law is a sentence you should be allowed to finish without someone tearing the page. And above it all, a sky that holds its breath. A city about to learn the speed at which prosperity burns. And a man, a black lawyer, with soot already on his cuffs, who will become our witness. He does not know it yet. He only knows that documents matter, that names matter, that dawn will come whether or not the night behaves. He gathers what he can, facts, faces, fragments, because when the storm breaks, memory will need anchors. Hold here for one more heartbeat. The camera resting on the hotel brick, on the theater lights, on a barber pole still turning. And then tilt south toward the courthouse glow, where a rumor is busy becoming an event. And an event is busy becoming a history some will try to rename. The street inhales. The clock hand moves. And the threshold between peace and fire, that narrow board across which a city steps, waits. Begin with paper, because paper remembers even when walls do not. City directories list names in rows as neat as Sunday collars. Archer, Greenwood, Elgin. Barbers, dressmakers, porters, teachers. Numbers that once rang a bell behind a counter. Deeds filed in the courthouse tell you how a street gets born, who sold a lot, who borrowed, who built. Mortgages cleared with the stubborn pride of cash counted on a kitchen table. Insurance policies, some paid up to the penny, sit in folders that will later come back stamped with a sentence colder than rain riot clause. Claim denied. There are ledgers in churches, baptisms inked in a careful hand. Marriages witnessed by men who will in a day be looking for their rings in ash. School rosters, a teacher's list of children moving from spellers to readers. The marginalia of a life going right. The black press carries gossip and grit hair, shows sermons, graduations, the social electricity of a city that believes in next year. Then paper turns. The headline takes on a serrated edge. Ink becomes an accelerant. An afternoon edition prints. A phrase leans hard on its verb, and rumor, which has been starving all day, sits down to a hot meal. In the courthouse, the boy is kept behind a door. On the steps, men who did not plan on reading tonight become editors of what happens next. A telephone rings in a newsroom, a tip, a directive, the strain in a voice that signals a page is being loaded like a magazine. Facts stacked like bricks, a courthouse, a prisoner, a crowd, deputies deputized, some in name, only weapons distributed in a way that will be called necessary later and reckless forever after. From the north, veterans arrive. They do not come to start a war. They come in the belief that citizenship is a shield. They offer help. They ask for order. They stand as witnesses, and the air pulls tight like a wire. A question is asked, a hand reaches a gun, speaks before a sentence can finish. Then the sound you never forget, not the first shot, but the way all the other sounds shrink to make room for it. Chairs scrape. Someone drops a hat and never looks for it. The stairwell turns into a throat through which a city tries to shout and only manages to choke. When the noise settles, the math has changed. It is not a courthouse anymore, it is a fuse. Night falls, or more precisely, night leans in. South of the tracks, cars begin moving in packs. North of the tracks, doors click shut. Windows go black. A mother's whisper folds children into the hollow between bed and floor. The map redraws itself in circles of light, each surrounded by a larger darkness into which men disappear and then return. Different. Logbook entries begin: Police, National Guard, Red Cross. The language flattened by duty patrol deployed, shots fired, arrests made. There is a scaffold of numbers, time stamps, street corners, counts that never quite add to what the eyes saw. Witness statements disagree, and then rhyme men in badges who helped. Men in badges who handed out guns. Men without badges who found a badge in their pocket and a reason in their teeth. And then the first flame taken seriously. A house on Easton goes bright, and the street decides that fire is a kind of punctuation that ends arguments. There are photographs, you will see them. The panorama at dawn, the black line of cinders where businesses stood. A biplane or two in the background, if you look long enough, tiny, almost embarrassed in the sky, and testimony that they flew, that some shot, that some dropped incendiaries. The record will argue with itself, affidavits stacked against denials. But the survivor's ears remember the hum. Like a hive, one man will say, like bees that had learned to hate. The Red Cross will count shelters, will set up tents, will list the dead in a way that seems to minimize the word many. Numbers will settle dozens, scores, figures that people can carry without falling down. The streets will count differently. Uncles, neighbors, a girl who braided her hair tight every morning and never loosened it again. There is an arithmetic you learn only when your city burns, where one can feel like infinite and 100 can feel like someone else's lie. Return to paper. Mary E. Jones Parrish begins compiling voices, a book built from smoke and sorrow. Buck Colbert. Franklin writes a narrative in which law's sentences strain to hold back the weather. He sits at a rough table under canvas makeshift office and writes the city back into existence, one affidavit at a time. Affidavit, a word that means I swear, a word that will try to outlive flames and forgetfulness. He swears to streets, to faces, to facts that some will find inconvenient. Meanwhile, official memos practice an art. America knows too well passive voice as shield. Property was destroyed. Lives were lost. Order was restored. By whom and to whose order? The memos let the ash answer. Insurance letters arrive with the cold precision of a type bar riot exclusion. Policy after policy returns with the logic of a trap door. The very word that blames the victims also pays the companies a business model arranged around vocabulary. Do not forget the map on which Greenwood rose. The tracks drew a line, yes. But black money learned to recirculate north of that iron. Banks lent. Clubs booked musicians. Doctors kept sets of tools wrapped like gifts. You can trace prosperity in the tax records, a revenue stream the city was happy to take in until the night it allowed that same stream to be evaporated by heat. Fact wealth destroyed is not an accident. It is policy with a match. Now let folklore walk in not as an escape, but as a mirror. Stories begin the next morning, not of monsters, but of echoes that refuse to leave. In one kitchen, a woman swears the barber pole across the street kept turning for days. After the shop was gone, a red-white spiral in midair. A handle with no door. On a foundation where a tailor worked, people say they smelled hot starch every sunset, as if someone kept pressing a suit made of smoke. In the schoolyard, children speak of piano notes, at noon single careful keys, like a teacher calling roll in a classroom without walls. There is a lane where a portable church stood. Survivors will tell you that if you pass that ground at dusk, you will hear a hymn with no words, a song that is all breath and no syllable. They tell you not to join it. Just listen. Because some songs are meant to keep a place from slipping entirely into silence. On Greenwood Avenue behind the tent city, a boy says he saw letters flying. Real letters, the alphabet itself shaken loose from signboards and ledgers, A's and G's and S's lifting like birds, only to fall again, ash settling back into the shape of names. On Elgin, where a photographer once sold portraits, people begin to dream the same dream, a camera on a tripod pointed at the empty lot. And when the shutter clicks, the picture shows faces that aren't there by day. Folks argue whether dreams count as evidence. Memory, tired of the argument, keeps the dreams anyway. We were posed one, grandmother says, laughing softly. I didn't even have to hold still. Didn't even have to. In the relief lines, whispers travel faster than soup. A woman recognizes her wedding ring in the soot as a circle of coolness on the ground. Not even metal anymore. Just the impression where metal refused to burn. She presses her thumb to that circle, and for years when she tells the story, she shows you the thumbprint. That's where I kept my marriage, she says, right there in the cool part of the ash. If you prefer your hauntings without the supernatural, hear the other kind, the rational ghosts, the habits that refuse to die. A police knock that pauses too long between the second and third rap. A sir-only wail that circles neighborhoods and never lands. A file drawer that sticks when you pull the names of black claimants. These are the hauntings that policy writes. And that policy, if it ever wanted to, could end. But the people of Greenwood kept a different ledger, witness accounts that anchor the ash to the earth. A woman notes the hour 2 Huzru a.m., the moment she saw light along the eaves like a skirt of fire. A man remembers aircraft low enough to read the whim of the pilot in the tilt of his wings. Another recalls the deputized men who broke his door, not with the urgency of rescue, but with the leisure of permission. A pastor lists psalms that helped him keep his hands from shaking while he escorted the elderly down a back stair. A boy sets down in an adult hand years later the exact number of times he heard someone say, "Move along," while he looked for his sister. There are photographs, not often printed, not only of ruin, but of order out of ruin, soup lines, field kitchens, needle and thread passing through the first dress to be sewn after the fire. In those frames you can watch a city learn to breathe with bruised lungs. The Red Cross tents sit like white punctuation marks on a charred sentence, commas, pauses that say, not the end, not yet. And under one canvas, a man at a table writes with a blunt pencil statement after statement, building a case against forgetting. Now, listen to the two layers together, the factual scaffold and the folklore echo, and you will hear a harmony. Fact says insurance refused. Folklore answers the money tried to come home, but couldn't find the door. Fact says planes observed. Folklore says the sky learned a hard word and has been reluctant to speak since. Fact says deaths undercounted. Folklore murmurs we set an extra place at reunion tables, just in case someone from that night finds the road. The city keeps 2 clocks after a catastrophe, the official time measured in reports, and the felt time measured in breaths. In official time, the guard moves, arrests are made, curfews set, an uneasy quiet restored. In felt time, the night refuses to move on. Midnight visits every evening around supper and hangs its coat over the same chair. Children play, then stop, then listen, then play again louder to drown a silence that always wants more room. And yet, amid the soot, Greenwood writes its own counterspell. It is work. It is reconstruction with hands still blistered. It is business licenses reapplied for. Lots rehung with strings to mark new walls. Loan meetings held under a shade tree because shade is what you get for free. The folklore of return begins stories of lost ledgers turning up in strangers' mail. A photograph found in a different city's attic and mailed back with no note. A church bell that no one can find yet, whose shadow shows on the ground at noon, a dark crescent where children sit. The first Sundays after, people dress as well as ash permits. They walk to where their church stood and stand facing the place where the pulpit would be. The sermon is short, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is everything to say, and no paper yet to hold it. The preacher offers one sentence that will serve as policy and prayer. We will be counted even if you keep losing track. The amen rises like dust when boots begin to move again. In the years to follow, commissions and reports will return to this ground. They will tally parcels, assessments, owing and owed. They will listen to survivors whose voices keep the beat steady. They will argue over who started what. But the street knows that the question is not who struck the first match. The question is who kept pouring the gasoline and who sold it as law. The facts will keep their shape bruised but upright. The folklore will keep its grace shimmering over the facts like heat above a road. And here's a thing that both layers agree on: names. The hardest labor after a fire is lifting names back into place. Not just the names of the dead, not only the names of the missing, but the names of barbers, teachers, porters, dressmakers, bookkeepers, musicians, because the point of burning a city is to make titles replace people. Greenwood refuses the exchange. In ledgers and in lullabies, names return. So we close this layer where we began, with paper. A charred page can still be read if you turn it slowly and breathe between lines. An affidavit becomes a spine if you stack enough of them. A photograph, even one that smells of smoke a century later, can pin memory to place so the wind stops moving it around. The facts stand shoulders touching, and the stories walk among them like kin. Together, they hold the shape of a city that was not merely destroyed, but targeted. Together, they make a promise not of vengeance, but of reckoning, a reckoning measured in truth, told aloud in names said clearly in streets rebuilt stone upon stone, until the map and the memory finally match. Hold the frame a moment. Let the 2 clocks tick in your ears. Let the ash settle. And then step with us toward the next beat, where incidents rise, where witnesses become actors, and where the truth written and whispered finds the cadence that can carry it past a century, into your room, into your breath, into the part of you that refuses to accept that any city can be murdered without the world and you learning its name. Start where the air turns brittle. Courthouse steps. A crowd packed so tight the night can't breathe. A veteran's hand steady rests on a rifle he hopes he won't need. A deputy's badge newly pinned flashes like a small moon under a street lamp. Voices stack. Shove. Repeat. One question asked badly becomes a shove. A shove answered poorly becomes a grasp. A grasp met by fear becomes the sound that edits the night a single shot. Then the echo that multiplies it into many. The courthouse coughs men into the street. Shells spin, roll, settle in gutters where tobacco spit used to shine at noon. The boy in the cell hears the building change shape wood-stone breath. Everything tightens as if the whole structure clenches. South of the tracks, engines catch. North of the tracks, kitchen lights die one by one. The city makes 2 decisions. In the same minute, attack and hide, and both will leave marks. On Greenwood Avenue, a door opens halfway, then all at once. Inside, someone whispers, "Now." Children curl under tables. A mother presses a tin of papers to her chest. Birth deeds, a receipt for a piano lesson, documents that sound like a life when shuffled together. In the alley, an older man checks the weight of his courage and finds it barely enough, then carries it anyway. Down on 2nd Street, a car glides like a shark. Men inside have the faces crowds develop when they practice righteousness all afternoon. A flash glass bursts. Another wood splinters. A sign tilts and hangs by a single nail like a tooth in a child's mouth. The driver laughs a sound that tries to be a joke and lands as a confession. Behind them, the street rearranges itself into hazard. Witnesses will later disagree on the order of flames, but they agree on the pace, sudden. A bungalow lights from the eaves inward. A store catches as if a hand pressed a match against its name. The first house is always a test, the second an agreement. By the third, the street believes in fire the way a choir believes in harmony. Sparks hop blocks like small animals with cruel training. The guard forms men in uniforms that smell of storage. Some steady, some thrilled. Commands travel weirdly through smoke half heard, half assumed. Disarm. Protect. Clear each word, drops a different picture into each head. A squad halts at the tracks, then steps over boots clicking on iron crossing from promise to problem in the space between rails. A veteran from Greenwood raises his hand not as a threat, but as a grammar, the way you lift a palm in church to mark where the sentence turns. We're here to keep the peace. His voice is careful, the kind that has walked away from trenches. The boy is under law. He waits for law to answer back. It doesn't. Instead, 2 new badges appear from pockets. A crate opens. Long guns pass hand to hand like hymnals. At Dreamland, the marquee gutters and dies. Inside, the smell of popcorn surrenders to the smell of wet wood and cordite. A woman in a white hat, still perfect even now, guides people to a back exit. Then returns for one more child who wasn't hers 5 minutes ago and is hers forever after. The alley behind the theater narrows into a funnel. Smoke thickens. Breath shortens. Someone coughs a psalm. On Elgin, a barber leaves his mirror for the last time. He looks only once at the chair where a kid had his first shave this afternoon. The towel is still folded. The jar of blue disinfectant holds combs like cold fish. He lifts the jar, sets it down. No, he will not take it. He will take the strop, the thing he sharpens with, because edge matters now. He steps outside. The air tastes of matches. Planes. Yes, small insect bright under a half moon. Witnesses swear to the sound, first high, insistent, wrong for a city night. Up there silhouettes bend, down here heads tilt. Something maybe bottles with rags, maybe shells falls and argues with roofs. Official papers will call it mistaken reports. Hysteria, fog of war. The ears of Greenwood will not be persuaded they heard the sky choose sides. The relief station opens under canvas. A nurse jaw set-eyes kind counts bandages like money. She records names as if they were transfusions notes. Who can walk, who must be carried, who keeps asking for a brother they can't find. A Red Cross clerk writes unknown in a column that was not meant for such a word. He hates the way the ink looks there, like a seed planted in frost. Across from the Stratford, a line of men moves fast, too fast, for the dignity of brick. Someone shouts an address, someone else repeats it. Then the chant becomes a target. The door gives, dust blooms, banister spindles pop like knuckles. What gets taken first? Not always cash, sometimes pillows, sometimes a framed graduation photo, sometimes a library book stamped "Return by June 6th" that no one will ever find. Looting is an inventory of the soul, what men grab when they believe no one is watching and the city tonight pretends blindness. Buck Colbert Franklin. Our witness watches, writes, moves. He calibrates distance close enough to see far enough to live. In the narrow lane behind his office, he gathers clippings that escape the fire, a corner of a contract, half a name, and puts them in his pocket as if saving seeds for a season not yet promised. He speaks to whomever will listen, sometimes to no one. Sentences that begin, "Let it be known," because someone must beg history to keep its appetite small. On a stoop, a boy learns the weight of silence. He sees men with badges and men with none, doing the same work with the same wrist motion. He sees a door he painted last spring fall inward, as if ashamed. He tastes the edge of a curse he will spend a lifetime sanding down to a prayer. He will write later grown formal hand of the moment he adopted the habit of standing to the side of windows. Just enough to live a long time. In the makeshift jail, some call it that. Some call it shelter bodies press, numbers faces breath. Men corralled for their safety, or from it, depending on who tells it. A pastor grips a rail and hums not to calm others, but to measure his own shaking. A guard young, not hard, yet asks his partner quiet how long. The partner shrugs a shrug that means until dawn, until orders, until someone says, "We can stop." No one says that. A house with lace curtains burns differently quietly, as if ashamed to crackle. In the yard, a woman realizes she can carry 3 things and chooses the tin of papers, her mother's Bible. The cast iron skillet black as a starless night. She looks once at a wedding photograph and memorizes it like a paragraph. Pauses commas, the way his tie sat crooked, then lets it go. Some objects are meant to travel as ash. In the church basement where children play in winter, volunteers count out bread with fingers that keep tally as if telling beads. A deacon sketches the neighborhood on a scrap X for fires arrows for safe alleys. A circle for where someone saw a man with a white handkerchief and a mean smile. The map is small and wrong and life-saving. They tape it to a door. People touch it as they pass the way you touch a relic. At the rail yard, a rumor hisses. A freight car unlocked. Or a car locked with the wrong people inside. No one is certain. Certainty isn't on offer. What is certain? Movements. Groups herded. Groups dispersed. Lists made with pencils that snap because they were sharpened in anger. The language of control hums, line up, move along, faces to the wall, and the language of refusal replies under breath, "We're citizens. We have receipts. We have names." There is a moment, always a moment, when the street could turn back. A lieutenant steady could have said enough and meant it. An editor late could have printed retraction bigger than the first harm. A mayor awake could have stood on a step and placed his body where the fuse ran and said no farther. That moment passes. Not with a bang, but with a murmur. Paper shuffles. Orders blur. The fire chooses a new block. Atop a warehouse, two men kneel with rifles, one nervous, one bored. They point where a crowd points because crowds are easy compasses. In the alley below, a teenage girl crawls with her little brother through a run of blackberry vines. Thorns write on her shins in a language only she and July will ever read. She remembers to keep him quiet by telling him a joke, and he laughs at the wrong spot. And a shot answers the laugh, and the city learns how sound draws fire. Toward dawn, if we can call it that, the color of the smoke changes from night black to paper gray. The guard posts placards that try to declare order. The wind flutters them into litter. Trucks clatter, boots thud, stretchers pass. Men not from Greenwood direct men from Greenwood to stand in lines and name their addresses. Addresses that burned 3 hours ago. Addresses that still rise as heat when spoken aloud. The clerk writes no longer standing. He does not mean the house. And still rising, acts of small defiance stack like bricks. A teacher collects 3 salvaged readers and calls them a library. A baker tears loaves in half to double his inventory of mercy. A kid finds a harmonica in a pocket and plays one note clean stubborn, and another kid answers from somewhere in the smoke with the same note. And there is a line thin bright between them that no map can erase. By the time the sun admires itself in whatever glass remains, the incidents have become a river. People swept, diverted, stranded on roofs of memory. The Stratford's rooms stare like sockets. The Dreamland's floor damp and gritty holds shoe prints that end at a door and resume nowhere. A barber's pole lies horizontal still, maybe moving in a breeze you can't feel from here. The tent city stands stitched punctuation between clauses of ruin. And at a rough table, Franklin begins to write the day down, while it's still hot, so hot, the pencil warms his fingers, because the city must be set in sentences before someone else sets it in stone. Rising incidents. Yes, but also rising witnesses, each act violent, merciful, ordinary graduates into testimony. The boy who laughed at the wrong time will speak years later with a care that startles you. The woman with the skillet will feed 3 families through the first week and never mention it except once on a porch. When someone thanks her by name and she blinks like she's met a mirror. The barber with the strop will teach his grandson how to keep an edge, not for blades, for truth. Hold on this. The camera lifting above smoke that thins. The tracks like a scar. The prairie pretending innocence. Incidents have risen layer upon layer until the shape of intention shows through. What began as rumor now wears a uniform. What began as a crowd now carries a ledger under its arm, labeled order. And Greenwood bruised, singed. Standing breathes in, breathes out, and prepares not just to survive, but to name. At dawn, the city insists on being counted, even if the counting hurts, even if the numbers slip like ash through fingers. The guard posts notices curfew pass required restricted movement, and the paper of authority flaps against a fence where laundry once waved like ordinary flags. Men in uniform funnel survivors into narrow columns. Clerks at rough tables begin lists, names, ages, addresses that now sound like elegies. We are told to trust the ledger, so we watch the ledger work, slowly, stubbornly, with a pencil that breaks and is sharpened again. Red Cross field notes stack themselves into a low wall of order tents erected. Cots issued rations distributed a precise handwriting. The arithmetic of mercy, 200 loaves, 60 gallons of coffee, 300 blankets. Then in the margins, a kind of quiet weather report, infant fever. Elderly needs shade, family separated at B Street. By nightfall, a camp breathes at the edge of Greenwood canvas ribs, rope sinews. stitched punctuation in the charred paragraph of the map. A nurse calls roll, not like a teacher, but like a lighthouse sweeping the dark with names. Police tallies enter the file, arrests for looting, weapons seized, detentions for safety. The language rounds off its corners. Numbers without faces and counts have a way of rinsing away what eyes saw. Elsewhere, insurance agents appear with briefcases that click like miniature verdicts. They open policies, find the clause they came to find, and point with a fountain pen, as if the ink itself were a deputized finger riot exclusion. 3 syllables that reclassify catastrophe into the tidy kingdom of not our concern. Courthouse minutes log a grand jury questions that sound like answers, trying on masks. Who brought arms? Who incited? Whose rumor was treated like law? The transcript prefers the passive, it was alleged. Buildings were destroyed, shots were exchanged, and by whom dissolves between lines like sugar in hot coffee. Outside in the heat, an assessment board invents a method to value loss without admitting theft square footage. Materials. Age of structure numbers that stand upright but cast crooked shadows at noon. Yet the most reliable machine running at daybreak is not governmental. It is Greenwood itself. Bread ovens borrowed. Wash pots shared. A blackboard propped against a tree where a teacher writes the day's letters beside the names of the missing. A is for Archer. She says softly, chalk dust rising like incense. B is for B Street, and for Beatrice, who will be found. Children repeat it the alphabet as search party, a litany that steadies the hand. Buck Colbert, Franklin. Jaw-tight sleeves rolled, raises a tent that says, law without needing a sign. A plank for a table, a stump for a chair. A pencil sharpened with a pocket knife between every statement. People line up not because paper can feed them, but because paper can argue for them when their voices are tired. I, being duly sworn, do depose and say. And a city gathers itself between those phrases, like breath between ribs, like a lung that refuses to collapse. Mary E. Jones Parish moves in the careful bustle of a field reporter and a mother collecting testimonies, soothing a child, labeling a page, saving a name from the casual eraser of time. She handles her camera the way a medic handles gauze, gently, exactly because a photograph can close a wound a little, can say this existed. We existed. Look. Around her, the folklore of survival begins slipping between tent ropes and ash piles, the softest fabric in a hard place. Fact insists aerial observation occurred, pilots in the sky eyes on smoke. Witnesses insist harder shots from above, drops that spark secondary fires. Officialdom shrugs unverified, but the neighborhood's ears remember the hum and teach their children its timbre. When you hear that kind of sound, an elder says decades later, go inside. The sky may not be on your side. The warning settles like dust on a windowsill, ordinary, permanent. Fact assembles numbers, structures, lost lives, counted dollars assessed. The totals wobble like a table on an uneven floor, too low for the weight of eyes. Meanwhile, funeral homes keep quieter, books, names, hours, hymns requested, shoes polished, flowers that still smelled like Sunday, even on Thursday. Those ledgers are not public record, but they are the record people trust, because grief keeps better notes than committees. From the camp's edges, churches reappear not as buildings, but as circles. A chorus forms at dusk, no organ, no sheet music, only a line and the human will to sing. They choose call and response, because the world just asked a question no street should have to answer. Guide me. Someone calls, and many answer. O thou great Jehovah. Between calls, voices pass necessary news. Who is sleeping where? Who needs penicillin? Whose ring was found flattened but glinting in a pile of roofing nails? Now, deeper into the folklore. into the rituals by which people stitch torn days together. Sweeping ash before sunrise, 3 strokes toward the door, 1 back into the room, never sweeping across the threshold in case a name is carried away. Naming a corner for the first thing that survives there. Skillet gate, Bible step, cool fishtail shade. Hiding a ledger page inside a new wall when rebuilding a paper bone so the house remembers whose body it is. Leaving a cup of water near a doorway each night for the ones who didn't make it to morning. Listen to the dreams. On the blank where a school stood, mothers report the same vision, chalk dust rising, though there is no bored children reciting days of the week out of order. In the lot where the beauty parlor once hummed, some swear, they smell pressing oil whenever it's going to rain. She's keeping our heads ready, a woman jokes, laughing through a throat that wants to cry. On the patch where the bandstand sat, a trumpet note floats near midnight single. Stubborn answered by a harmonica from another tent. Ask the pastor and he whispers, the Lord lets us tune the city back to itself. 1 note a night. Fact returns, steadying the camera. Rebuilding permits appear. Forms stamped with dates that look almost indecent after ash. Loans, some granted by black bankers with money salvaged in pockets. Some denied by institutions that have learned nothing, set people in motion. Barbers plant chairs in the grass and start cutting, 1 eye on the mirror, 1 on the horizon because hair keeps growing even when cities burn. A baker halves loaves to double mercies. A seamstress threads a needle and calls it infrastructure. In the relief office, a clerk invents a new column, rejoined family, because the old categories fail to hold joy. Check marks perch there like birds returning to a wire. A woman finds her sister after 4 days by recognizing a scar beneath soot. The bicycle one, she laughs, then both cry. Then they share an orange very slowly, section by section, as if it were communion. Meanwhile, policy sharpens itself in back rooms, district lines redrawn with a logic that looks neutral from far away and tilted up close. Building codes reconsidered, materials, setbacks, fire breaks spun as benevolence used as control. Records misfile themselves, mysteriously. A term migrates, riot feels more convenient than massacre, and the word seeps into headlines, ledgers, insurance letters, the public mouth. Words are cranes, they lift histories from one foundation to another, and Greenwood keeps nudging the crane back toward the footing that holds. The folklore braids tighter with the facts, now less spooky, more stubbornly human. People begin to tell return stories. A warped photograph arrives by post from 2 states away, with a note, found this in a trunk, think it's yours. A psalm book reappears in a pawn shop miles off, margin notes, unmistakable, bought back for a song and a promise. A brass doorplate with a family name is found under the wrong porch. The family wires it to the underside of their new steps so the house can relearn how to say us. Children play a game in the tent city, map and memory. One calls an address, 123 North Greenwood, and another must answer with a smell or a sound from that place. Catfish, phonograph, screen door squeak, mama humming. They learn something public schools rarely teach, that geography is intimacy. At dusk, elders join the game, adding shopkeepers' midwives' nicknames, the price of Saturday candy, and in playing they draft the city's future signage in their throats. A photographer returns with a new camera glass. Plates gone, film rolls now, and moves carefully among ruins and risings. He asks permission more than he takes it. He frames hands, nailing spooning blessing hands more than faces. His notebook lists firsts: first haircut after the fire, first loaf from the salvaged oven, first hymn under a roof, first baby born since the smoke lifted. His captions are short, we are not a rumor. Back to the ledger of law. Franklin compiles affidavits that read like the spine of a stubborn book. He dates each page, signs with a hand that does not waver even when the wind shoves the canvas wall. Some statements are clinical: who, where, when, And some carry heat, they said, move along while we watched our place lift to air. He files injunctions, petitions, claims that will be answered slowly or never. But filing is itself a fact. A footprint in wet concrete, even if someone later tries to broom it smooth. Pause on a number not to fetishize it, but to mark scale where words blur. Hundreds of businesses gone. Thousands left homeless, a phrase that is really a weather report of human rooms scattered to wind. Dollar valuations that translate love into ledgers, a saxophone priced like a chair, a library priced like a fence, a ring priced like a nail. Numbers are blunt tools. Greenwood insists on names as the fine ones. At night, the tent city hushes a quiet with texture. There is the flap of canvas, the far clank of a rail coupling, the threading sound of prayers as families stitch them together, one needle, many hands. Some add a line deliver us from the words of others. Some add a name each evening for Beatrice, for Mr. Williams, for the boy who laughed at the wrong time. The prayer becomes a roll call. The roll call becomes a kind of policy. Policy, if the city ever listens, will become repair. When the first walls rise, they stand straighter than grief expected. Scrap becomes scaffolding. Memory becomes measure. Someone nails a tin star to a beam, punched by hand with a nail set for the ones in the sky. The builder says, chin lifting toward where the insect planes once drew their thin malice. Someone slips a list of names into a cavity near the door, so whoever walks in has to pass through us. And then one evening, a parlor returns 4 chairs, a table, a lace cloth scorched but surviving. In that room, a decision is made that cities live on to keep telling the story as a duet. Fact will march with dates, places, affidavits, maps. Folklore will walk beside with dreams, rituals, music smell. Each corrects the other, each protects the other. Together they make a truth large enough to shelter children. The final image in this turn is not a ruin. It is a hand on a new doorknob, wood fresh, brass bright, habit old. The hand hesitates, turns, and a room opens that smells of soap-cut pine, and something else, the faint trace of smoke that will likely never leave. The person steps in, sets a photograph on a shelf, hangs a skillet on a hook, places paper in a drawer labeled Keep. Outside the street rehearses a sound it has withheld laughter that isn't nervous. It isn't loud yet, but it carries, and with it a sentence that reads like a vow. Greenwood will be counted, in ledgers and in lullabies, as long as breath can still be stacked into words. Hold the frame on dawn. The smoke thin to a paper gray, the tents breathing like tired lungs, and the sound of pencils starting again. This is where a city either disappears into rumor or insists on becoming record. Watch the choice harden not in speeches, but in small mechanics, a date written true, a name spelled right, a signature that doesn't shake. Buck Colbert Franklin sits at the plank table, sleeves dusted, cuffs singed, and calls the first witness of the morning. State your name, your address, what you saw. The cadence is simple, liturgical, and yet the room feels it the way a soft hammer tests a wall and finds studs. A woman answers, voice cracked from smoke, but precise. She gives corners, hours, faces. He writes every digit, every syllable, as if they were nails in green wood. When she finishes, he turns the page, that tiny sound, paper over paper, and in the hush you hear it, the city taking its first unassisted breath. Across town, other instruments of decision clatter to life. At the courthouse, the grand jury convenes under fans that only stir heat from one side of the room to the other. Questions are asked with the weariness of men who already prefer answers that lay blame in the vaguest possible place, in crowds, in temper, in the abstract weather of human nature. Still, The stenographer's machine ticks like rain on tin. Words, even cowardly ones, become lines you can follow back later. At the relief station, a nurse opens a ledger to a fresh page and writes a date that feels indecent in its crispness. She begins a new column, reunited, and the sum at day's end will be small, but non-zero. That is its own arithmetic, a number that refuses to be rounded down. She underlines it once, lightly, so no one can miss the stubborn fact that hope has entered the tent. And then the hinge. The moment when all the strands tighten. A courier from an insurer steps into the tent city with a satchel of decisions. He is a man of ordinary apologies, company policy beyond my control. And his papers are clean, almost arrogantly so, as if they've never spent a second near a flame. He opens a folder. He withdraws a letter. He points to a clause. The word is short, hard, smug riot. It lands on the table like a padlock. Around the word, entire streets go silent, not because they are persuaded, but because they recognize a weapon dressed as vocabulary. Franklin reads, slow, lips tightening, not in surprise, but in the confirmation of something he had already known in his bones. He turns the letter so the woman who lost her shop can see it. She looks, mouth a tiny O. And then she laughs a small, exhausted laugh because sometimes the only response to a trick is to name it. So that's how we burn, twice, she says. The room hears the sentence and adopts it. Burned by fire, then by paper. Outside along Greenwood Avenue, another hinge turns, this time in the spine of the street itself. Volunteers raise two beams with a yoke and a grunt, the first frame of the first wall that will stand taller than memory expected. The sound is plain, wood on wood. But it cuts through the leftover siren in the air. Heads lift. A child counts the nails, 1, 2, 3, and the count becomes a rhythm others match with hammers. The city chooses the oldest verb it knows, build. In the sky, quiet now, a buzz returns for a moment and vanishes. Phantom or real, it hardly matters. Below the reflex remains eyes, glance up then down to the work. That too is a metric you can trust, the ratio of looking to building. Yesterday it was mostly looking, scanning for fire, for faces, for harm. Today, hand over hand, more building than looking. Not triumph, not even safety, but an inflection the body recognizes. Back to the table, the next affidavit. A man speaks in measured pieces, blocks windows, the tilt of a hat, the color of a truck, the language a deputy used that turned help into a riddle. Franklin interrupts only to fix a spelling, to ask whether a corner was Archer and Greenwood or Archer and Elgin, because corner's anchor claims the way pegs hold canvas. Mary Parrish notes the man's posture, the way truth leans forward when it is tired of being chased. She clicks the shutter. On the plate, ash is a soft halo. His eyes are a ledger no clause could deny. The grand jury adjourns to lunch ham sandwiches in air that tastes of disinfectant and something older. Denial, maybe. In the hallway, a young reporter asks a question with too much hope in it. Will there be compensation? A man smiles the way paper cuts, thin, bloodless, and talks about process. The reporter writes the word anyway, as if ink could shame it into meaning. Meanwhile, a pastor takes a chalk stub and draws a box on a plank lot lines for the sanctuary that will exist again. He writes a single dimension, 24 feet, then a second 36, and circles the numbers until they look like vows. A boy asks why the back wall is thicker than the front. So it carries our echo, the pastor says. And the boy nods like someone who has decided to become an architect when he survives childhood. The inflection lives in audiences as much as in actors. Yesterday, the tent city stood in the posture of being watched. Today, it stands in the posture of watching back. Eyes follow the courier from the insurer as he moves tent to tent, not pleading, measuring. Eyes follow the city officers as they pin notices, Not begging, reading for the trap. Eyes follow the carpenters as they lift beams. Not doubting, learning the angle by which an afternoon becomes a roof. Here is a number that declares itself without needing a meeting one. One wall upright. One contract signed in pencil because the fountain pen cracked from heat. One first loaf that does not taste of smoke. One reappearance a girl thought lost steps into the line with a bowl and a grin that has no plan for stopping. She says her name, twice, just to hear it. The ledger hears and writes more carefully on the next page. And here is the sentence that turns rumor into record, I swear. It repeats, again, again, until the tent has its own weather humid, with breath heavy with held tears. Sworn statements stack. The stacks become a weight you can feel if you place your palm on them. Franklin does, briefly, a gesture that looks like prayer and is also engineering testing load imagining shelf. Deciding where in a rebuilt office the testimony should sit so the floor never gives. At midday, a contradiction announces itself in the open. A line of aid trucks stops where a line of requisitions begins. Men argue over whose authority is taller. The sun takes no side. The heat treats both uniforms the same. In the confusion, a woman simply walks between them and carries a sack of flour to the kitchen tent. She is small. The sack is large. This is how policy is sometimes improved, not amended, outpaced. The climax does not explode. It accumulates. It is the moment enough voices say no to the polite phrases meant to close their mouths. It is the moment the word riot finally refuses to sit on survivors' tongues. In conversation after conversation, they replace it massacre, and the replacement feels like a shoulder clicking back into the socket it should never have left. Language stands upright. Shoulders follow. By late afternoon, a chalkboard near the relief tent shows 3 columns, missing found building. The numbers do not comfort. They orient. Under building, a hand has added a 4th tally with a different heading. Vows, and beside it the first entries pay the teachers bury with names, sue even if they laugh. Someone has drawn a small box around that column as if to protect it from erasure. You understand the instinct vows have always been fragile in this country, and when made by the wrong mouths, often punished. But here, in ash and daylight, they look indestructible. Toward evening, Franklin steps from the tent and finds Mary Parrish standing with her notebook closed, watching the first wall lean into the second. Listen, she says. He does. The street has a new sound, the pre-echo of rooms, that hollow thrum you get when space begins to remember its shape. He thinks of courtrooms, of kitchens, of offices with doors that close not to exclude, but to concentrate. He thinks sharply, almost angrily, we will have doors again. The camera pulls back. Slow, high, unblinking. Greenwood is not restored, not forgiven, not made whole by any sentimental arithmetic. But the line has bent. From burned to booked, from erased to enumerated, from rumor to record. The inflection point is not a speech or a parade. It is the quiet multiplication of acts that can't be talked out of happening. A wall stands. A ledger thickens. A word is replaced. A vow is written where the wind can't steal it. And in the last light, the motif returns a man holding pages that almost became silence, lifting them into air that still smells of smoke, and finding in the weight of paper a way for breath to travel further than flame. Never forget. We said at the start. Now the city answers not with plea, but with practice we won't. Because forgetting here would require demolishing what we just raised, and we have learned enough about demolition for one lifetime. Begin with a room that smells of soap, cut pine, and a faint thread of smoke that refuses to leave. A new door, a new hinge. The old habit of pausing with your hand on the knob as if asking permission from those who didn't make it through. Greenwood after not as postcard, not as myth, but as practice. Practice at rebuilding, at recording, at refusing the tidy lie that fire is the end of a sentence. It is not. It is a comma you decide to outlast. In the months that follow, the neighborhood walks a narrow beam between hunger and work. Two economies run side by side, the visible one of boards and bricks, and the invisible one of favors remembered and repaid. A barber sets out a chair on packed dirt and writes a ledger with charcoal pay when you can. A seamstress stitches school collars from cloth that carries last year's hymns. A teacher holds class under a patched awning, the blackboard a door laid flat on crates, and writes the date with reverence, as if holding the line against erasure. Policy moves more slowly, and sometimes backwards. Insurance letters continue their choreography of refusal, riot, exclusion. Act of crowd. All the ways a city can be told it burned wrong. Petitions stack, hearings drag, grand juries sit and blink like owls in daylight. But the affidavits keep arriving, the grammar of "I swear" accumulating until the courthouse can smell the truth through its plaster. Buck Colbert Franklin files what can be filed and writes what cannot be filed yet, because some days the only court open is the future. Some nights the neighborhood stages a ritual so small you could miss it if your eyes prefer spectacle. At dusk, a circle forms where the bandstand once stood. No instruments, only mouths. Someone hums a line with no words, a tone you can lean a body against, and others join until the air carries a roof that boards have not yet supplied. Children sit on the ground, tracing lot lines with sticks. This was the bakery. This was the photo shop. This was the place where Mr. Williams told jokes too early on a Sunday. Geography as prayer. Legacies begin here with lists. Mary E. Jones Parrish edits her manuscript by lantern glow, trimming repetition, preserving cadence, keeping the heat where it belongs and the light where it can't be missed. She chooses photographs that insist on faces more than flames. She writes a sentence many will treat like a handrail that it happened, that we saw, that we are telling you now. Her book travels farther than feet could and survives longer than paint. In kitchens miles away, readers close the covers and sit very still with the new knowledge that a city can be murdered and still refuse to die. The children of Greenwood inherit two languages, the one with dates and deeds, and the one with smells and songs. They know the term assessor young, and the feel of a hammer's heft before algebra. They learn to stand a little to the side of windows, a habit written into the body like punctuation. And they learn from elders with tired eyes and tender hands to say the word massacre out loud, without trembling to choose it over riot, because it tells the truth about gravity. Time passes the way time always does, unevenly, like a record with a scratch. Decades move, people move. Some carry Greenwood folded into wallets, a photograph creased to the shape of a palm, a receipt for a sofa that no longer exists, a key that opens nothing but memory. Some return on anniversaries and measure the street by steps 10 from the corner to where the candy jars shone, 12 to the chair where a first haircut nicked an ear, 20 to the counter where a promise once had a price and a witness. They talk, they argue, they correct each other gently, truth as quilting. America, meanwhile, performs its familiar tricks, forgetting in daylight, remembering at night. Textbooks flinch, newspapers step around, politicians praise law and order with voices that sound like matches. But the record built plank by plank in the ash waits with patience more muscular than denial. Reports arrive, commissions decades late, official phrases that at last confess what kitchens were never allowed to forget. The word massacre enters the public mouth and stands there, awkward at first, then inevitable. A door clicks into its frame, another legacy wealth translated into absence. The numbers here are blunt, and still they miss. Generational capital burned. The down payments that would have been. The college tuition that might have come in envelopes instead of miracles. The interest that would have grown if time hadn't been told to stop. You can track it in what grandchildren must work twice for. In the way a promising Saturday becomes a shift. In the way a business plan folds itself small enough to fit a pocket with holes. Loss with a long echo. Yet legacy also means insistence. The businesses return. Not all. Never enough. But enough to keep the grammar of commerce in the neighborhood's mouth. Church bells return. Sometimes only as shadows on noon ground. But shadows can call to people just the same. Weddings proceed, not as forgetfulness, as defiance. Babies arrive and are named for those the camp recited at night: Beatrice, Mr. Williams, the boy who laughed at the wrong time. A name is a reclaiming. A christening is a legal argument folded into song. Listen for the motif you heard at the beginning, the man with pages that almost became silence. He ages. His handwriting steadies further with use. He drafts briefs other lawyers will carry like torches into rooms that prefer candlelight. He argues that a clause can be a crime when wielded against a people. He loses more than he wins, until the calculus changes slowly. Then suddenly, the way ice changes mood in spring. One day a door that always sighed no opens just enough to admit a single sentence. On another day, years later, it opens wide enough for a street. Outside the courtrooms, the city redesigns its memory. Markers appear, plaques with dates and names, murals where brick once looked away. School field trips arrive, small hands touching cool metal letters that stay when you close your eyes. Survivors speak into microphones and hear their own voices amplified through speakers, a reversal of the old acoustics of power. The air learns their names. It keeps them. Even the wind which once carried sparks now carries syllables farther than corners. Elsewhere in quiet academic rooms, ledgers and oral histories are married at last. Scholars quote Mary Parrish and Buck Franklin, with footnotes that finally feel like respect instead of burden. Genealogists thread family lines through smoke and find branches where officials swore there were none. A granddaughter opens a file and sees her grandmother's affidavit, the same curves and crossings and cries at the sight of a voice she has never heard speaking so clearly in graphite. And always, the kitchen table remains the most honest archive. Around it, stories rehearse and refine not to smooth edges, to make them safe to hand to children. A father admits he hid behind a barrel and still feels the hoop of it around his ribs when he can't sleep. A mother admits she bargained with God and paid her part by feeding other people's children for a month. A son admits he changed his name for a while, and then changed it back when the city remembered his. Laughter interrupts tears. Tears rinse laughter. The table collects both like coins in a jar for a future purpose. What then is Greenwood's legacy to anyone not born on those streets? A warning, yes. That rumors in the wrong mouths are accelerants. That polite paperwork can be an arsonist. That a city can be meticulously unmade in the name of order, but also a manual for repair. That affidavits are scaffolding. That songs are roofs you can raise in an hour. That names said aloud are load-bearing. That when history tries to rename you, you can rename it back. Stand one last time at Archer and Greenwood. Somewhere near where the barber pole once turned. Close your eyes. You will hear the two clocks ticking together, official time, felt time. You will hear a hammer, then a hymn, then a heartbeat that belongs to no single person and to all. You will smell something frying, something pressed, something inked. And if you listen farther still, you will catch the pre-echo of rooms not yet built, laughter assembling itself. Argument arranging chairs. A teacher calling roll with a voice that makes the alphabet feel new again. So we close where we began, with a neighborhood that lit the night with prosperity. Then was set on fire, and still refused to be smoke. Never forget, we said. Greenwood replies, neither a plea nor a demand, a practice we won't. Because forgetting would require dismantling what we just raised, denying the vows written in chalk and ink, surrendering the names we have put back on maps and mouths. The door opens. The hinge remembers. The room breathes. Before we go, leave a note in the comments where you're listening from, the time on your clock, and the name you refuse to let burn. Someone a century from you may find it and know why the smoke never had the last word.